Most people will break in 2026, but these 10 harsh Stoic rules will make you unbreakable.
You sit in the dim light of your own room, perhaps late at night when the rest of the world has gone quiet, and something inside you refuses to settle. The day has passed another Diane, yet the same small fractures remain. The promise you broke to yourself again, the irritation that rose too quickly, the distraction you allowed because facing the work felt heavier than scrolling past it. You tell yourself tomorrow will be different. You have told yourself that for years. That quiet promise is the first crack. Most people never notice it because they never stay with the discomfort long enough to see what it really is. They paper it over with new plans, new resolutions, new apps that count habits they will abandon in 3 weeks. But the fracture is not in the plan. It is in the moment between intention and action when the body says no, while the mind still pretends yes. That single breath of hesitation is where everything begins to weaken. You are not weak because life is hard. You are becoming weak because you have trained yourself to believe that the hesitation deserves compassion instead of confrontation. The first harsh rule is this: stop negotiating with the part of you that wants to remain comfortable. Every time you feel the inner pull to delay, to soften the standard, to explain why today can be an exception, you are not witnessing a reasonable request. You are witnessing a trained reflex. That reflex has been fed for years by small surrenders. Each surrender teaches you the nervous system that discomfort is optional, that resolve is negotiable, that the self can be bargained with. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the dark hours before dawn, not because he enjoyed it, but because he knew that if he waited for the light to feel ready, the day would already have slipped from his control. He did not argue with the reluctance. He simply refused to give it a voice. You must do the same. When the alarm sounds and the mind immediately begins its familiar litigation, 5 more minutes. I didn't sleep well. I'll make up for it later. Do not answer. Do not reason. Do not comfort. Simply stand. The standing itself is the verdict. The body moves before the debate concludes. That is the beginning of discipline. Action that precedes permission. Most of your life you have waited for inner alignment before acting. That is why you remain breakable. Alignment follows obedience, never the other way around. The obedient act creates the condition for alignment. The waiting for alignment creates only more waiting. Look carefully at the last time you failed to follow through. Strip away the story you told yourself afterward. What remains is almost always the same. You felt the resistance, you acknowledged it as real, and then you gave it the deciding vote. That is the moment the fracture deepens. The Stoic does not pretend the resistance does not exist. He feels it exactly as you do: the tightness in the chest, the sudden heaviness in the limbs, the soft whisper that you says this can wait. But he treats that whisper the way a sentry treats a shadow at the gate. He notes it, he measures it, and then he refuses it entry. Refusal is not violence against yourself. It is fidelity to the man you said you would become. You have spent enough years being kind to the weaker version of yourself. That kindness has not made you stronger. It has only made the weaker version more entitled. In 2026, the world will not grow gentler. The distractions will multiply. The demands on your attention will sharpen. The excuses will dress themselves in better language: self-care, boundaries, mental health. But beneath every sophisticated excuse lies the same ancient bargain: comfort now, strength later. Later never arrives. Strength is not built in the future. It is built in the refusal that happens right now, in this breath, when everything inside you wants to bend. So begin here, not with grand declarations, but with merciless precision. The next time the resistance appears, and it will appear within the hour, do not speak to it. Do not journal about it. Do not meditate it away. Simply do not obey it. Move the body. Write the line. Make the call. Close the tab. Stand when every instinct says sit. One clean refusal at a time. That is rule 1. Not because it feels noble, not because it earns applause, but because every other path you have tried has left you exactly where you are, promising yourself tomorrow while today quietly collapses. You already know what happens. When you keep negotiating, you are living the result. The only remaining question is whether you are finally tired enough of your own excuses to stop inviting them to the table. If the answer is yes, then do not wait for certainty. Certainty is another excuse. Stand now. The rest of the rules will mean nothing if this first one remains optional. You have stood once. Perhaps not gracefully. Perhaps the body moved while the mind still screamed objections. But you moved. That single act, however small, has already changed the terms of the negotiation inside you. The weaker part no longer assumes automatic victory. It knows now that you are capable of refusal, and that knowledge frightens it. So it adapts. It no longer begs for 5 more minutes. It begins to offer reasonable alternatives. I'll do it later today when I have more energy. I've already done enough this week. Balance matters. This isn't the right moment. I need to be in the right headspace first. These are not new thoughts. They are the same surrender dressed in better clothes. The second harsh rule is this: never trust a reasonable-sounding excuse when the real cost is your self-respect. Reasonableness is the most seductive form of self-betrayal. It feels mature, it feels measured, it feels like wisdom. But examine it closely and you will see. Every reasonable excuse preserves the exact same outcome: the delay of discomfort, the postponement of growth, the maintenance of the familiar fracture. Seneca did not call you these thoughts excuses. He called them impressions. The mind receives an impression. This is hard. This can wait. You deserve rest, and if you assent to the impression without examination, you have already lost the contest. Assent is consent. Consent is command. And the command is always the same: remain as you are. You must learn to withhold assent, not by arguing, not by generating counter-arguments. Arguments are theater. They give the impression dignity. They pretend the impression has a case worth hearing. Instead, treat the reasonable excuse the way you treat smoke. Notice it, name it, and do not breathe it in. The moment the thought arrives, I'll do it later. When I'm more focused, do not reply. Do not debate whether later is realistic. Do not weigh pros and cons. Simply say, internally with cold clarity, that is an impression. I do not assent. Then act anyway. The action does not need to feel inspired. It does not need to feel aligned. It only needs to happen while the impression is still present and unendorsed. This is the second fracture point most people never cross. They defeat crude procrastination, just do it, brute force, but then they fall to sophisticated procrastination disguised as prudence. Prudence without action is cowardice wearing spectacles. You have felt this many times. The day you told yourself you would train when the weather improves. The week you decided to write when inspiration returns. The month you postponed the difficult conversation until emotions settle. Each time the delay felt justified. Each time the justification quietly widened the fracture. Look backward now, not with shame but with merciless accuracy. Count the number of times later, when conditions are better, actually produced better conditions. The number is 0. Conditions never improve on their own. They improve when you stop waiting for them and begin imposing order on them. In the year ahead, 2026, the external world will continue to offer endless justification for delay. Economic pressure, global uncertainty, personal fatigue, new distractions disguised as necessary research. Every headline, every notification, every conversation will hand you fresh, reasonable excuses. If you accept even one, the reflex returns stronger. The mind learns, I can still win by sounding wise, so you must starve that learning. When the reasonable excuse appears, treat it not as a friend offering counsel, but as a thief quietly trying the lock on your resolve. Do not negotiate with thieves. Do not invite them in for tea to discuss their motives. Lock the door, bolt it, then do the thing anyway. The doing itself is the bolt. Over time, this is the strangest and most reliable part. The impressions themselves begin to lose volume, not because you defeated them in debate, but because they no longer receive the oxygen of assent. They become background noise, like wind against a closed window. You hear it, you feel its pressure, but it no longer turns. You are the handle. This is not peace. Not yet. This is the beginning of sovereignty over your own impressions. Most men live their entire lives as tenants in their own minds, allowing every passing thought to sign the lease. You are choosing eviction. It will feel lonely at first. The reasonable excuses were old companions. They kept you company in failure. They explained it. They softened it. Without them, the silence inside can feel stark. Welcome the starkness. Silence is not emptiness. It is space. Space in which something harder can grow. You have already refused once today, perhaps twice. Each refusal widens that space by a fraction. Do not measure progress by emotion. Measure it by refusals logged. One clean refusal at a time. Not because it feels good, not because the universe rewards it, but because the alternative continued tenancy to every reasonable-sounding thief is no longer acceptable to you. You are not yet unbreakable, but you are no longer casually breakable. The fracture has stopped widening. For now, You have refused the crude delay. You have withheld assent from the reasonable excuse. The space inside is widening not dramatically, not with fanfare, but steadily, like a crack in dry earth after the first real rain. Now the mind changes strategy again. It no longer begs or bargains. It begins to accuse. You're being too hard on yourself. This rigid approach is making you miserable. Real discipline isn't this joyless you're turning into someone you wouldn't. You want to know. Look how tense you are, where's the peace Stoicism promises. These are not impressions anymore. These are moral indictments. The mind has moved from negotiation to prosecution. The third harsh rule is this: do not defend your discipline against accusations of cruelty. The moment you begin to justify your refusals, I'm doing this for my future self, this is self-love in disguise. Eventually it will feel natural you have already stepped into the courtroom the mind has prepared. And in that courtroom, you are never the judge. You are always the defendant. Every defense you offer becomes new evidence against you. The more eloquently you explain why your discipline is compassionate, the more you reveal that you still secretly fear it might not be. The mind smells blood. Seneca understood this trap better than most. He wrote to Lucilius not to convince him that hardship was good, but to remind him that the need to convince himself was already defeat. When the accusation arrives you are too severe, the wise man does not answer. He simply continues the action that provoked the accusation. Because the accusation is not about severity, it is about power. The weaker part of you is losing ground, and it is trying one last appeal, make the stronger part feel guilty for winning. Guilt is the final currency of surrender. You've felt this guilt before. The evening you skipped the unnecessary social obligation to read instead, and then spent half the night wondering if you were becoming cold, distant, joyless. The morning you rose at dawn to train while others slept, and later caught yourself thinking, maybe balance would be kinder. The afternoon you said no to a pleasurable distraction, and the mind whispered, you used to be more fun. Each time, the guilt felt noble. It felt like conscience. It felt like proof that you still cared about being human. It was none of those things. It was blackmail. The mind does not care about your happiness. It cares about regaining control. If guilt restores the old regime of comfort, then guilt is the preferred weapon. So refuse the trial entirely. When the accusation lands this path is making you miserable, do not audit your emotions to see if it's true. Do not measure your current mood against some imagined ideal of Stoic serenity. Do not scan your body for tension as evidence for or against the charge. Simply note, an accusation has arrived, then return to the action. The action itself is the acquittal. Not because it proves you are right, not because it feels good, but because continuing despite the indictment is the only language the mind eventually understands as final. Over months, not days, the accusations grow thinner. They still arrive like old debts that keep showing up at the door, but they carry less weight. You stop opening the door to inspect them. You no longer feel the need to prove they are false. Their presence no longer requires rebuttal. This is not indifference. It is disentanglement. You are no longer proving your discipline to yourself. You are simply living it. Most people never reach this disentanglement because they keep engaging the prosecutor. They journal about their feelings. They talk to friends about being kind to myself. They read books that reassure them discipline can be gentle. Each engagement feeds the prosecution. Starve it instead. The next time guilt arrives dressed as concern for your well-being, treat it the way you treat a beggar who is actually a pickpocket. Polite recognition. Firm distance. Continued movement. Do not hate the beggar. Do not pity him. Do not debate whether his story is true. Just walk past. In 2026, this will become more difficult. The culture will grow louder in its demand for softness. Every advertisement, every influencer, every wellness trend will tell you that true strength looks like self-compassion, flexibility, listening to your body. They will frame refusal as violence against the self. They will call discipline toxic. If you pause to defend against that framing, you lose. The defense itself concedes the courtroom. So do not defend. Do not explain. Do not post quotes about balance. Do not signal virtue through moderated ambition. Simply continue. The continuation, repeated, becomes the only argument needed. You are not becoming joyless. You are becoming selective about joy. The joy that arrives after refusal, after weeks of refusals, is not the quick dopamine of comfort. It is slower, denser, quieter. It does not shout. It settles. You have not felt it fully yet, but you have tasted its edge in the moments after a clean refusal when, for just a second, The inner noise quiets and something steadier takes its place. That steadiness is what the accusations fear most. They know that once it roots, their voices become echoes in an empty hall. So let them echo. Keep moving, one clean continuation at a time. Not to silence the prosecutor, not to win the case, but because the case itself is no longer your concern. You are no longer on trial. You have refused the crude delay. You have starved the reasonable excuse. You have walked past the guilt dressed as concern. Now the fracture begins to heal not with softness, but with pressure. The mind, sensing the loss of its old levers, does something more dangerous. It offers compromise. I'll meet you halfway. I'll do half the work today, the rest tomorrow. I'll train, but only for 20 minutes instead of 40. I'll write, but only when the words come easily. These are not surrenders. They are worse. They are partial victories for the weaker part, enough action to quiet the conscience, not enough to build real strength. The mind has learned, if it cannot stop you entirely, it can dilute you. The fourth harsh rule is this: never accept half measures when the goal is wholeness. Half measures are the polite name for slow poison. They allow the appearance of progress while preserving the fracture at its core. You feel movement sweat, words on the page, a checked box, and the mind whispers, "See, you're doing it." But the depth never increases. The callus never forms. The muscle memory of full commitment remains untrained. Epictetus did not teach partial obedience to reason. He taught that the slave who obeys only when it suits him is still a slave. The free man obeys when it does not suit him, precisely because freedom is proven in the refusal to negotiate terms with compulsion. You are not yet free. You are still bargaining with yourself over the price of freedom. Examine the last time you accepted a half measure. Strip the justification. It's better than nothing. I was tired. Progress is progress. What remains is simple. You allowed the minimum required to preserve self-image without paying the full cost of transformation. That minimum is the ceiling you have built for yourself. Every half measure reinforces it. You become the man who does 20 push-ups instead of 40, who writes 300 words instead of 1,000, who meditates for 5 minutes instead of 20, always enough to feel disciplined, never enough to become disciplined. In the long quiet of your own company, you already know this ceiling exists. You feel its weight every time you stop short. The stopping short is not laziness now. It is a trained preference for the familiar boundary. To break that preference requires something the mind hates most: asymmetry. You must act disproportionately to the resistance. When the impulse says 20 minutes, you do 40. When it says 300 words, you do 600. When it offers half now, half later, you do all now, not to punish yourself, not to prove anything to an imaginary audience, but because symmetry with weakness keeps you symmetrical to weakness. Asymmetry over payment, overcommitment tilts the balance toward the man you are trying to become. This will feel extravagant at first. Wasteful even. Why do twice as much when half would suffice? The mind will frame it as inefficiency, as perfectionism, as unnecessary severity. It is none of those. It is investment. Every extra repetition, every extra paragraph, every extra minute held in silence deposits compound interest in the only account that matters: your capacity to bear discomfort without fracture. Most lives fracture not from catastrophe, but from the slow accumulation of half measures. The man who always does half eventually believes half is his limit. The limit becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. You are not destined to remain halved, but destiny is not changed by wishing. It is changed by disproportionate action in the moments when proportion feels most reasonable. In 2026, this will be harder to sustain. The world will celebrate minimal viable effort. Minimum effective dose will be gospel. Productivity gurus will sell you 20-minute routines that promise transformation. They sell comfort disguised as strategy. If you buy it, if you settle for the minimum effective dose, you buy the ceiling with it. Reject the dose. Take the full measure, then take more. Not out of pride, not for show, but because the work itself demands fullness if it is to remake you. The next time the compromise arrives, and it will arrive dressed in practicality, do not calculate whether the extra effort is worth it. Worth is another negotiation. Instead, ask one question only: what would the unbreakable version of me do right now? Then do that. Not half, not most, all. The body will complain. The mind will tally the cost. Let them. Their complaints are receipts, proof that payment is being made. Over weeks, the receipts accumulate. The ceiling cracks. Light enters, not dramatic light, not revelation, but the plain light of increased capacity. You begin to notice small impossibilities becoming ordinary. The run that once ended at 3 kilometers now reaches 5, without negotiation. The silence that once lasted 10 minutes now stretches to 30. The refusal that once required clenched teeth now arrives almost quietly. This is not arrival. This is evidence that the fracture is filling not with comfort, but with denser material. Do not celebrate it. Celebration invites the mind to rest on its laurels. Rest invites half measures again. Simply continue, disproportionately. One full measure at a time. Not because it feels heroic, not because the year demands it, but because anything less keeps you exactly where the compromises have always kept you, promising wholeness while living half. You are tired of living at half capacity. The tiredness itself is useful. Let it push you past the offered midpoint. The other side is not symmetry with comfort. It is symmetry with what you said you wanted to become. Cross there. Not halfway. You have refused the crude delay. You have starved the reasonable excuse. You have walked past the guilt. You have rejected the half measure. Now the pressure inside begins to build in a new way. Not from outside demands, not from failure, but from the growing distance between who you were and who you are becoming. The old identity, comfortable with fracture, familiar with compromiser, starts to feel like clothing that no longer fits. It pulls at the shoulders, it restricts breath, yet shedding it completely means standing naked before your own gaze. The fifth harsh rule is this: endure the grief of outgrowing who you used to be. This grief is not dramatic sorrow. It is quiet, persistent, almost imperceptible at first, like the ache of a limb that has been bound too long and is finally allowed to straighten. You miss the ease of the old excuses. You miss the company of the old indulgences. You miss the version of yourself that could fail without feeling the full weight of betrayal. Most people never allow this grief to surface. They replace one habit with another, one distraction with a shinier one compromise with a slightly less obvious compromise. They change behavior without changing allegiance. The old self remains alive inside, quietly resentful, waiting for the first sign of weakness to reclaim the throne. You cannot afford that waiting. To become unbreakable, you must bury the old allegiance, not with hatred, not with ceremony, but with deliberate, repeated acts of non-recognition. When the nostalgia arrives, I used to be able to relax without guilt. Life felt lighter. Before I started this, maybe I was happier when I didn't care so much. Do not comfort it. Do not analyze whether it is true. Do not compare past ease to present strain as if they were commensurable. Simply note, that is the voice of the one I am leaving behind. Then return to the present action. The action is the burial, not words about change, not affirmations of growth. The 100th push-up when the body remembers it used to stop at 50. The hour of writing when the mind remembers it used to celebrate 300 words. The sustained silence when the old self remembers it used to fill every gap with noise. Each repetition is a handful of earth on the coffin. The grief lives in the repetition itself, the knowledge that what was once sufficient is now insufficient, that what once felt like enough is now recognized as deficit. Seneca wrote to a friend who complained of inner conflict, "You are mourning the death of a part of you that should have died long ago." He did not offer sympathy. He offered clarity. Mourning is appropriate, but prolongation is indulgence. You are in that mourning now. Allow it to exist, but do not feed it attention. Do not journal poetic reflections on lost ease. Do not romanticize the version of you that fractured more gracefully. Do not seek consolation in memories of when things felt simpler. Simpler was not better. Simpler was smaller. The grief will peak in ordinary moments. When friends invite you to an evening of easy talk and you decline because the work calls. When the body begs for rest and you give it one more round because the old limit no longer binds you. When solitude stretches longer than it used to, and the absence of distraction feels like loss instead of gain. In those moments the old self knocks hardest. It does not argue anymore. It simply reminds you of warmth, of lightness, of belonging to the common stream of human avoidance. Turn toward the knock, acknowledge it, I hear you, and then do not open the door. The refusal to open is the grief's completion. Not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to live in it. In 2026, this grief will be sharpened by contrast. The world will accelerate its offering of ease, instant entertainment, frictionless convenience, communities built around shared softness. Every screen will show you versions of life where no one seems to carry this particular weight. The comparison will sting. It will whisper that your path is isolating, unnecessary, perhaps even arrogant. Let the sting register. Then continue. The sting is the sound of old roots pulling free from soil. Over time, months, not days, the grief changes texture. It stops feeling like loss and begins to feel like clarification. What you mourned was not joy, but the absence of responsibility for joy. What you mourned was not freedom, but the illusion that freedom required no structure. The structure you are building is narrower at first. Fewer indulgences, fewer escapes, fewer companions who prefer the old ease. But within that narrowness, capacity expands. The silence becomes habitable. The effort becomes ordinary. The self-respect no longer borrowed from external approval begins to stand on its own legs. You are not yet at peace with the narrower life. Peace comes later. What you have now is something more reliable than peace: alignment. The inside and the outside begin to match. No more secret negotiations. No more double bookkeeping. This alignment is what the unbreakable recognize in one another, not swagger, not loud certainty, but the quiet absence of inner contradiction. You feel its first traces after the grief has crested and begun to recede, a decision made without afterward second-guessing, a refusal delivered without apology, a mourning begun without inner litigation. Do not chase these moments. They are not rewards. They are byproducts. Continue burying, one full action at a time, not to escape grief, not to arrive at some painless state, but because the man who refuses to mourn the death of his weaker self remains chained to its corpse. You have carried that corpse long. Enough. Lay it down. Walk on. The path narrows, yes, but it leads somewhere the wide road never reaches. You have refused the crude delay. You have starved the reasonable excuse. You have walked past the guilt. You have rejected the half-measure. You have endured the grief of burying the old allegiance. Now something shifts beneath the surface, not relief, not triumph, but a new kind of pressure. The actions have become more consistent. The refusals arrive more quietly. Yet the mind finds one final subtle lever: comparison. You look at others, those who seem to move through life without this constant inner friction, and the question forms unbidden. Why does it have to be this hard for me? Why do they appear unbroken while I still feel every crack? Why must I pay such deliberate attention when others seem to coast? These are not childish complaints. They are measurements taken against an illusion. The mind has no photographs of other people's inner rooms. It only has the polished facade they present, the calm voice in the meeting, the effortless routine on social media, the casual mention of discipline as if it were a personality trait rather than a daily choice. The sixth harsh rule is this: never measure your resolve against someone else's appearance. Comparison is the thief of self-mastery because it replaces internal sovereignty with external arbitration. As soon as you accept another person's visible ease as the standard, you hand over the verdict on your own worth. The verdict is always the same: insufficient, too slow, too effortful, too burdened. You do not know what quiet wars they fight in the dark hours. You do not know how many mornings they surrendered before the one you witnessed. You do not know the compromises they still allow themselves when no one is watching. Most of all, you do not know whether their apparent unbrokenness is strength or simply a longer leash on the same fracture you are trying to close. Marcus Aurelius, writing alone in camps surrounded by plague and mutiny, never once compared his struggle to that of lesser men or greater emperors. He compared himself only to the standard he had set the day before, not to feel superior, not to feel defeated, but to keep the compass pointed inward. Turn your compass inward now. When the comparison arrives, he makes it look easy. She never seems to waver. Everyone else has figured this out. Do not refute it with evidence. Do not search for proof that their life is harder than it appears. Do not console yourself with the thought that they are weaker in secret. Simply redirect the gaze. Ask, compared to yesterday, am I holding the line more steadily? That single redirection collapses the external court. No witnesses are called, no testimony is required, only the record of your own hours. This redirection is harder than it sounds. The mind prefers the wider arena of comparison because it offers endless material for excuse or consolation. In comparison, you can always find you, someone ahead to justify despair, or someone behind to justify complacency. Both paths lead back to the same place: permission to soften. In 2026, the arena will be louder than ever. Feeds will overflow with curated mornings, optimized routines, people declaring their unbreakable habits as if they were born with them. The algorithm rewards the appearance of ease. It punishes visible struggle. You will see men half your age posting videos of dawn meditations that look serene, workouts that appear effortless, days structured like clockwork. The temptation to measure will be constant. Resist by narrowing the frame. One day, one refusal. One sustained effort against yesterday's version of the same act. Do not track streaks for vanity. Track them for evidence. Evidence that the line is held not perfectly, not without tremor, but held nonetheless. The man who compares outward eventually lives outward. His sovereignty becomes borrowed. His resolve becomes performative. He strengthens only when watched, weakens when unseen. You are choosing the opposite, to strengthen unseen, to hold when no one records it, to continue when the feed scrolls past. This choice brings a peculiar isolation, not the dramatic loneliness of withdrawal, but the quiet solitude of self-accountability. No one applauds the extra set when the gym is empty. No one likes the post that never gets written. No one congratulates the silence maintained at 3 a.m. when sleep would be easier. Yet that solitude is where real density forms. Not the density of muscle or habit alone, but the density of a self no longer contingent on external arbitration. Over time, the comparisons arrive less frequently, not because others change, not because the world grows kinder, but because the habit of inward measurement becomes stronger than the reflex of outward scanning. The mind, like an eye trained on a single point, loses interest in the peripheral blur. You begin to notice something unexpected. The people who truly appear unbroken are rarely those who broadcast it. They are the ones who do not need to. Their ease is not absence of friction, it is mastery of it. And mastery leaves no trace for comparison because it does not compete. You are not yet there. But you are traveling the only road that leads there. So when the next comparison knocks tonight, tomorrow, next week, do not open the door to debate. Do not peer through the glass to assess the stranger's life. Simply turn back to the task in front of you and ask the only question that still matters. Am I better than yesterday at remaining myself? Answer with action. Not explanation, not justification. Action. One clean inward measurement at a time, not to outpace others, not to prove superiority, but because the only verdict worth hearing is the one you deliver to yourself in silence. The rest is noise. You have refused the crude delay. You have starved the reasonable excuse. You have walked past the guilt. You have rejected the half measure. You have endured the grief of burial. You have turned the compass inward. Now the pressure changes again, not from resistance, not from comparison, but from the accumulating weight of consistency itself. The actions repeat. The refusals become pattern. The days begin to resemble one another in their deliberate shape, and in that repetition, something unexpected emerges. Boredom. Not the restless boredom of distraction-starved days, but a deeper, almost architectural boredom, the quiet monotony of a life built on the same few choices, day after day, without novelty to decorate them. The mind, long accustomed to variety as reward, now presents its case. This is becoming dull. Where is the spark? Is Unbreakable really supposed to feel this ordinary? The seventh harsh rule is this: embrace boredom as the final proving ground of self-mastery. Boredom is not punishment. It is the absence of external stimulation used as bribe. For most of your life, the promise of novelty, of new feelings, new experiences, new validations has been the hidden fuel for action. When the task felt tedious, you pushed through by anticipating the relief that would follow, or by imagining how the completed work would make you feel accomplished, admired, different. That anticipation was the real motivator. The work itself was secondary. Now the anticipation has thinned, the novelty has been stripped away. What remains is the plain act repeated in plain light. No fanfare, no promised high, no audience. Just the thing that must be done, done again, because it is what the day requires. Most people flee this moment. They introduce variation for its own sake, new routines, new tools, new philosophies, new goals, anything to restore the sensation of progress as excitement. They mistake the return of dopamine for the return of discipline. They do not see that the boredom is not a sign of failure. It is the sign that extrinsic bribes have finally lost their hold. Epictetus did not speak of boredom directly, but he spoke of roles. You play the role assigned by nature and reason. The philosopher does not seek to feel inspired while philosophizing. The soldier does not wait for exhilaration before standing watch. The parent does not require joy to feed the child at 3 a.m. The role is fulfilled because it is the role, not because it sparkles. You are now in the role of the man who keeps his word to himself. That role does not sparkle. It endures. When the boredom settles in, perhaps during the 50th identical morning, the 100th silent refusal, the 1000th deliberate breath held against distraction, do not fight it with novelty. Do not rebrand the routine. Do not chase a new why to make it feel meaningful again. Instead, sit with the plainness. Feel its weight exactly as it is. Dry, repetitive, unremarkable, then continue anyway. The continuation in boredom is what separates fracture from density. Anyone can act when inspired. Anyone can refuse when the stakes feel high. But to act, when nothing feels at stake, when the only witness is the man in the mirror who already knows what you will choose, this is where the material hardens. In 2026, the world will offer more escapes from boredom than ever before. Endless micro-distractions, personalized feeds that adapt to your exact threshold of tedium, communities promising that discipline should feel like play, like flow, like effortless alignment. They will tell you that if it feels boring, you are doing it wrong. They are selling you back the old bribe. Do not buy it. Boredom is not the enemy of mastery. Avoidance of boredom is. Let it come. Let it stay. Let it sit beside you through the set, through the sentence, through the silence. Do not speak to it. Do not explain it away. Do not promise it relief tomorrow. Simply do the next required thing while boredom watches. Over months, not weeks, the boredom loses its sharpness. It does not disappear. It becomes background, like the sound of wind through stone. You notice it without needing to react to it. The act no longer requires contrast to feel significant. Its significance lies in its own persistence. This is the strangest freedom, to no longer need the promise of feeling good in order to do what must be done. You are not yet joyful in the repetition. Joy may never arrive in the way the old self imagined it. What arrives instead is something steadier, presence without demand. Presence without demand is unbreakable because it asks nothing from the moment except you, that it be met exactly as it is. You feel the first hints of this in ordinary instance, the training session that passes without inner commentary, the writing hour that ends not with relief, but with quiet continuity, the evening that closes without the need to review whether it was good enough. These instants are small. They carry no drama. They leave no trace on any external record. Yet they are the proof. The fracture has filled with something that no longer cracks under monotony. Do not seek to accelerate them. Do not measure their frequency. Simply continue meeting the moment without bribe or complaint, one plain repetition at a time, not to conquer boredom, not to transcend it, but because boredom, once accepted, has nothing left to threaten you with. The mind that once used novelty as leverage now finds its lever rusted shut. You are left with the work. The work is enough. You have refused the crude delay. You have starved the reasonable excuse. You have walked past the guilt. You have rejected the half measure. You have endured the grief of burial. You have turned the compass inward. You have sat with boredom until it became indifferent background. Now the pressure is no longer pressure. It is simply the shape of your days. The refusals no longer feel like refusals, they are the default path. The actions no longer require summoning, they arrive as naturally as breath. What once fractured under strain now holds without remark. You stand in the quiet aftermath of all the small wars won in silence, and the question that once burned hottest has cooled to ash. What remains when nothing fights back? The eighth harsh rule is this: hold the line not because it is hard, but because it is yours. There comes a moment, perhaps it has already arrived in fragments, when the struggle ceases to define you, not because life grows easier, not because the world softens its demands, but because the inner architecture has changed. The fracture is no longer a wound to be monitored. It is sealed stone. The man who once measured every step against yesterday's weakness now walks without tally. He does not celebrate consistency. He does not mourn lapses that no longer occur. He simply is the consistency. This is not a rival at perfection. Perfection is a fantasy for those who still need applause from the future. This is a rival at responsibility without remainder. You no longer live with a shadow self waiting to reclaim territory. The shadow has been starved so long it no longer casts. What stands in its place is plain: a man accountable to his own word, not because he fears fracture, but because fracture no longer interests him. Marcus Aurelius, in the final books of his notes, wrote less of battles and more of acceptance, not passive acceptance, but the calm recognition that what is required is what is. He did not ask life to be otherwise. He did not ask himself to feel otherwise. He met the hour as it came, did what reason demanded, and let the rest pass without commentary. You are approaching that same economy of motion. The day begins. The body rises. The work is met. The silence is kept. The refusal, if one is needed, arrives without drama. No inner tribunal convenes. No ledger is checked. There is only the next necessary thing done because it is necessary. In this economy, freedom is no longer the absence of constraint. It is the presence of self-imposed form that no longer feels imposed. You have shaped yourself so consistently that the shape has become identical with you. To break it now would require deliberate violence against your own nature, not against some weaker version, but against the man you have made. Most never reach this identification. They hover in the borderlands of discipline, proud of their streaks, anxious about their streaks, defined by their streaks. The streak remains an external ornament, something they wear, not something they are. When the ornament slips, the fracture reappears. You have crossed beyond ornament. The line is no longer held. It is inhabited. In 2026, the world will continue its noise louder, perhaps, than before. New temptations will dress as necessities. New philosophies will promise effortlessness. New crises will justify retreat. None of it will move you the way it once did. Not because you have become numb, but because the center no longer shifts with the wind. The wind blows. The center remains. Feel that stillness now, not as absence, but as presence. The quiet after the last echo dies. The space where excuses once crowded is empty, not desolate, not triumphant, simply available for the next hour, the next choice, the next breath taken deliberately. There is no final victory here. Victory implies an opponent still standing. The opponent has not been defeated, he has been outgrown. What remains is maintenance, not heroic maintenance, not vigilant maintenance, but ordinary maintenance, the way a stonecutter tends the blade he has sharpened over decades. Tend it, not because the edge might dull tomorrow, but because the edge is what you use to meet the day. You will falter again, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next year. The falter will not feel like collapse. It will feel like a brief deviation from your own nature. You will correct it not with self-reproach, but with the same quiet redirection you now use for everything else. Return to the line, resume the shape. This is the unbreakable, not the man who never bends, but the man who returns so consistently that bending ceases to define him. You have built this over months of plain refusals. No one saw most of them. No record exists outside your own silent memory.
That is as it should be.
What is built in secret endures in secret. What is built for display endures only as long as the audience watches. The audience has left the room. You remain. So continue, not to prove anything, not to reach some final shore, but because continuation is now the simplest expression of who you have become. One deliberate breath at a time. One necessary act at a time. One day met exactly as it arrives. If this path still calls to you, if the quiet weight of it still feels more true than any easier road, then keep to it. Not as a project, not as a discipline to be maintained, but as the man you already are, walking the only path that fits. The work is never finished, but it is yours. Reflect on that ownership in the hours ahead, not with pride, not with sentiment. Simply recognize it, the way you recognize the feel of your own hand. Then do the next thing. Built by Stoicism is not a destination. It is a reminder that what is built in this way, slowly, privately, without fanfare, belongs to no one else. It belongs to you. Keep building.